So you've probably noticed that there's heaps of chat out there at the minute about bone health, bone density, osteoporosis, osteopenia. And you might be wondering what those words mean and whether they're things that you really need to be thinking about. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background and go through the reasons why I think that these are things that all of us, in particular women, should be thinking about, and probably earlier than you might have expected to have to. So the exact figures do vary, but the fact of the matter is that we do start to very slowly lose our bone density from about the age of 30, and that process is likely to accelerate a little bit post-menopause. So in general, a woman might lose something like 0.5% of her bone density every year in her 60s, and that might increase to something like 1 to 2% as we get over 70 and over 80. So that might sound like it's a far way off in the future, but if we consider that the bone density is sort of declining from 30 all the way onward, you can see that that decline compounds over time, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics actually shows that most likely 2/3 of all women over 50 have what is already considered osteoporosis or osteopenia. And those words basically are just quantifying terms of how far your bone density has declined. So they compare your bone density to that of a healthy 30-year-old. Once it is a certain distance away from that, you have osteopenia. And if it gets even further sort of lower than that number, then you progress to having osteoporosis. So about 1/5 of all people who have low bone density have osteoporosis, and the remainder have osteopenia. And the thought is that those numbers are probably underreported because the condition has no symptoms. So the most common thing you probably think about or hear about as a consequence of osteoporosis or osteopenia is a hip fracture. But unfortunately, it is actually possible to sustain other types of fractures from low bone density as well. So these are things that have all happened to clients of mine. So things like falling just from a standing height and fracturing wrists or both wrists, bracing your rib cage hard against something and fracturing a rib, or stepping down hard from a curb and fracturing a bone in the shin. So these are all things that have happened to clients that we've had, and they were all actually quite healthy and fit women in their 50s and 60s when it happened. And I'm not saying those things to scare you at all. I just think that the idea that osteoporosis is sort of this thing that only happens to kind of very frail older people is a narrative I reckon we need to challenge a little bit, just so that we're a bit more aware of the fact that it can happen sort of earlier than you think, and it's good to be aware of what you can do to try and prevent it as early as possible. So often it is sustaining a fracture that alerts people to the fact that they have poor bone density, and I think that does make this a really tricky thing to manage because of the lack of symptoms. It means that most people aren't screening for it. And so they don't know that they have this problem until it's sort of definitely already there. So on that note, if you are interested, I personally think that if it's something that is affordable for you, it's worth getting a DEXA scan to kind of see where you're at, so that you might find that is motivating to get you started doing something about it sooner rather than later, because prevention's always better than trying to then treat, or we can't really say cure it in this condition, but treat later down the line. So to me, it makes sense to try to build as much bone density as possible. So like make a really big, strong, dense skeleton as early as possible, and then try to hang on to that bone density throughout the lifespan. So if we're thinking in the prevention space, it's going to be lifestyle changes that are going to be your biggest tools to do those two things. If you've already been diagnosed with osteoporosis or osteopenia, you may actually still be able to improve your bone density. So although people are often told that it's impossible to improve it, I think that what that refers to is the fact that you're unlikely to be able to improve it beyond what you might have had when you were 30. But if it has been slowly declining, you might still be able to increase it relative to that decline. It depends entirely on the individual as to whether that is something you're going to be able to achieve or not. And so I want to make it really clear that if you do embark upon like an exercise program to improve your bone health, there is absolutely no guarantee that that will happen. But the thing I say to our clients all the time is that it is irrefutable that doing exercise is good for you. Even if your bone density continues to decline, it is likely that the exercise might slow it down. It might have some positive impact in that domain, but it's also going to make you stronger and reduce bone loss, muscle loss as well as bone loss. and improve your balance. And it has so many other health benefits. I think you find if you're following along in the media, more and more it's coming out that resistance training helps all these sort of chronic health conditions. So you can be really confident that if you do decide to take up some sort of targeted resistance exercise, you're doing something really good for yourself. So if you do already have osteoporosis or osteopenia, it's likely that you're already seeing a GP or an endocrinologist to manage the potential medical management side of the condition, which is really important. And like I said, it might be possible to improve your bone density even if you have a diagnosis. It might be possible to slow down any further bone loss. It's really important to know that anything that is said on these recordings are not in place of tailored health advice. It's really important to seek tailored care from a medical team to make sure you're doing the right thing for your specific diagnosis. So the point of this really isn't to take place of any tailored medical advice. It's essential to consult your GP if you're thinking about your bone health. But the point of this is to just get some education out there and give people some options that they can follow along with at home once they've already done their due diligence with their consulting of their specific medical advice. So please don't feel as though you've done anything wrong if you have got low bone density. I see this all the time as well, that people feel really guilty. Often people have had the healthiest lifestyle and they still end up with it. So please don't think that you've done anything to cause it. It's mostly genetic. So the fact is, I think it's about 60% of people who have osteoporosis or osteopenia. It's 60% caused by a genetic predisposition. I think it's important to do what you can to control the risk factors that you have got some ability to change. But remember that no, you could do everything right. You could have strength trained all your life and eaten heaps of calcium and you might still end up with these things. So don't blame yourself. Just do what you can to take some active steps now that you've got a little bit more information. So what are the big take-home points? We lose bone density from about 30, and this becomes more rapid post-menopause. Although hip fractures are one of the more common consequences of poor bone density, other fractures, such as that as a rib when bracing against something, are also common. Low bone density has no symptoms, so you won't know you have it without a DEXA scan, or if an injury occurs like a fracture because of it. Lifestyle interventions to manage bone density focus on building as much bone mass as possible and then aiming to reduce as much bone loss over time as possible. It might be possible to improve your bone density even if you are already diagnosed with osteoporosis or osteopenia. But regardless, bone building exercise, at the very least, is likely to mitigate bone loss to at least some degree, and it's likely to have health benefits outside of your bone density that are always going to be worthwhile. The number one biggest thing is that this is not in place of targeted medical advice, and it's really important to get specific advice for your situation from a GP, potentially endocrinologist, physiotherapist, before embarking upon any new exercise regimes.